What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four. But remember, one of the things Jonathan Hickman did is he shifted it from Fantastic Four to what's called FF, or Future Foundation. But regardless, this is the story when Doctor Doom joined the Fantastic Four, and he does it in what's probably one of the best ways ever in Marvel Comics, right? So here's the first thing to understand. This all kind of continues, so to speak, in the aftermath of the death of Johnny Storm. And the reality here is that with Johnny being out of the picture, the Fantastic Four are kind of looking for a new member, not so much as a replacement. The idea here is that with everything that's happened, to continue the Fantastic Four with the replacement member just kind of seems disrespectful. And I would imagine in a lot of ways, this is Jonathan Hickman kind of hitting on the John Byrne run, the aftermath of really Secret Wars in 1984. When Ben Grimm left the team, he was replaced by She-Hulk and so on and so forth. And so it's one of those things where Hickman just kind of seems to hit at this idea that like, that's not really how it's supposed to be. And so what they do, and the reason why it shifts to FF is because it's no longer the Fantastic Four. They no longer call themselves that. Instead, they now go by the name Future Foundation. And so this is a really cool thing because what ends up happening here is that in an effort to find a new member of the team, the first person they hit up is actually Spider-Man. The reason for this is that where Peter Parker did initially appear in Amazing Fantasy issue number 15, and that's where you get his first real origin and that kind of stuff, in Spider-Man number 1, he tried to join the Fantastic Four. This was, on the publishing side, Marvel's way of immediately beefing up the popularity of Spider-Man because the Fantastic Four were already hot to trot. And so with them being like the top publication Marvel had, and then Spider-Man already exceedingly popular with Amazing Fantasy number 15, it was a match made in heaven when they crossed over in the first issue. Now, of course, Spider-Man was rejected. He wasn't really allowed on the team. But over the years in Marvel Comics, one of the things that we've learned is that Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four have teamed up for a variety of circumstances. And so in the eyes of the team, it just makes good sense to bring Peter Parker on board, and that's what they do. Not everybody's on board with it. For example, Ben Grimm isn't really receptive to Spider-Man being there, but a lot of that's also because Ben Grimm is just kind of coming to terms with the death of Johnny Storm and the idea that Peter Parker is kind of a new person on the team, but not really replacing Johnny, just that kind of thing, right? It's really Ben being more angry with himself than anything else. But the other thing that goes on here is that with Reed Richards' father, Nathaniel Richards, no relation to King the Conqueror, with him showing back up again, for the most part, he's going to be a bit of a background character here. He is going to be involved, but you're not really going to see him doing a whole lot of insane and crazy things. But he becomes incredibly important later on down the line because there is a piece of information that he's holding on to in terms of why all these things are happening the way they are that we haven't even seen yet in the story that will become instrumental later on down the line. Now, another thing that happens is that Advanced Idea Mechanics breaks out the Wizard. Now, that's not overly important for the here and now, but it will be important here in a few minutes when we kind of move forward and get beyond or really get into the story. Now, one of the other things to remember here is that Valeria Richards, when she was met by her older self told her all hope lies in Doom. This is important because what we end up having after dinner's basically over and it's just kind of family being family is you basically have Reed Richards, his father, and Valeria who go to meet with Dr. Doom. And initially, Reed's not overly receptive to this. And it's kind of like, we need him, right? Valeria and even Nathaniel's stance is like, we need Dr. Doom though. And Reed's response is like, I mean, no one's gonna be on board with us. You do realize if we go to like Susan and Johnny and Spider-Man and we say, hey guys, so like Dr. Doom's joining the team, they're gonna be like, absolutely not. None of them are gonna be on board with this. But the response of really Nathaniel and Valeria is, but that's your job. At the end of the day, they look up to you. And so if you come along and you say, we need Dr. Doom, he has to be on the team, they will side with it. They'll do it grudgingly, but they'll do it nonetheless. And so that's ultimately when Dr. Doom is officially brought to the Fantastic Four. Now, following this, and what's really hilarious, things basically unfold exactly the way you would expect they would when it's announced to the Fantastic Four that Dr. Doom's on the team. Not only that, Dr. Doom, man, this is why in Marvel Comics, no one writes Dr. Doom better than Jonathan Hickman. And for those of you guys who are new to Marvel Comics, this is why fans of Marvel love Dr. Doom so much. So of course, Ben Grimm freaks out, right? Ben Grimm absolutely loses it and is like, not a chance. No way this guy's gonna be on the team. And while all this is going on, Dr. Doom's just watching this unfold and he's kind of like, I bet I could probably just bust this guy's balls the whole time. So while Ben Grimm is freaking out, Dr. Doom's like, is it true what I've heard, Ben? Is it true that what I've heard, right? That when Johnny Storm died valiantly facing an endless army, is it true that you, surrounded by crying children, weeping at the inevitable death of your close comrade and friend, is it true that you just watched. How very brave. Ben Grimm loses it. What little semblance of self-control goes right out the window, and he just goes to attack Dr. Doom. And of course, Dr. Doom can overcome Ben Grimm quite readily, but then the two of them encounter a force that neither one is prepared for, a pissed off wife, because Susan Storm comes in, shuts them both down, right? Freezes them both in their place, and is like, not in the house. And understand, Dr. Doom, sure, like, you're allowed on the team, Victor, but if you keep on mouthing off, I'll open a force field inside your brain that'll basically rupture the proper brain cells. You'll spend the rest of your days drinking your food through a straw and drooling. So unless you want to be that guy, shut the hell up. Like, it's crazy, right? It's just one of those really, really amazing moments. Dr. Doom knows better. Right? Dr. Doom, the guy's wildly capable. The guy does all kinds of stuff. The one thing you don't want to mess with is a pissed off Susan Storm. And so what goes on here is kind of this promise that was made, if you guys recall the last video that we did, that the agreement that was struck is that Dr. Doom would help Valeria Richards with a quest, a task that she had, if Valeria Richards would help Dr. Doom regain his intelligence. And so Dr. Doom is brought to the Future Foundation. And it's kind of this funny moment where literally you have Valeria who's sitting there, and she's already got the answer. She's just trying to see if Dr. Doom can figure it out, right? She's literally like, okay, with everything that's going on, even Peter Parker kind of chimes in because the Future Foundation doesn't really know how smart Peter is. This guy immediately makes his intelligence known when the kids really start asking the question, okay, sure, we can restore Dr. Doom's intelligence, but the ethical quandary here is, should we, right? Because we bring his intelligence back, he goes right back to Latveria, and he starts going on a quest for mad levels of power and all that kind of stuff. We're basically bringing back a villain that we're gonna have to face off against. And Peter chimes in and he says, okay, ethics aside, don't you need to determine whether we're talking about a structural issue or an actual physical damage or even just a data issue, right? Like, is the brain biologically sound, but it just now lacks large chunks of information, right? And with that kind of revelation there is something they hadn't really considered. Is it physical brain damage? He just physically can't access parts of his brain? Or is it that parts of his brain were removed, right? His intelligence, basically. And that's really the reality of it. Pieces of intelligence were removed. And so Valeria, kind of watching all this unfold, says, okay, so what we need is a backup of Dr. Doom's brain. So like literally reads like, did you hear that, Victor? And he's like, what? I'm not really paying attention. And Valeria's like, I said we need a backup. And Doom's like, yes, a backup. And she's like, yeah, exactly. I said we need a backup. And he's like, child, you are trying Doom's patience. And they just kind of sit quiet for a second. And she's like, I said we need a backup. It's moments like these that made Jonathan Hickman's run so fantastic. And that's when they realize it's Christophe Renard. Now, here's one of the things to keep in mind. What we had talked about previously during Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four run, here are these series of videos, is that when it came to Christophe Renard, he was the adopted son of Victor Von Doom, and he was the heir for Latveria. So when the time came, by whatever manner and whatever means where Victor Von Doom died, that Christophe could continue on and rule the place in his stead. Now, the other part of this, and probably one of the most genius decisions made by Dr. Doom, is that if something like this were to happen to him, if he were to be put in a position where he was functioning with diminished capacity, or if his brain was damaged irreparably, or something along those lines, and he created a new host body for himself, or whatever the case may be, Christophe Renard was made into a backup, meaning all of Doom's intelligence was stored inside of Christophe Renard. And even Christophe himself was aware of this, right? Like, he knows what's going on. It's a genius thing to do. And so what they end up doing is hooking him up to a machine. They literally purge the brain of Victor Von Doom of everything he knows and everything that makes him who he is. And then they initiate the transfer that takes the intelligence that's stored within Christophe Renard and is placed inside Dr. Doom, basically restoring him to his normal self. Now, here's the thing. If something had gone wrong, right? If Valeria Richards had been looking around and then tripped over the plug and it came out of the wall and the whole system shut down, like literally you'd be left with a Dr. Doom who's just in a catatonic state. He wouldn't know anything about anything. His brain wouldn't be able to function. He would basically be one of those lobotomized versions of Doom that we saw early in the story that was being captured by the Council of Reeds and placed below the Citadel. And so it's a crazy thing because following that, with this quest basically completed, now it's time for Dr. Doom to uphold his end of the bargain. And when Reed asks, what was it that you promised Valeria? The response of Dr. Doom is, I promised Valeria I would help her kill you, right? I would help her destroy you, so let's get on with it. In reality, it's destroying the Council of Reeds, because here's the thing to know, right? The last time we saw the Council of Reeds, they were fleeing for their lives from the Mad Celestials. Valeria had encountered them when she entered the portal, but we didn't fully know what happened. What ends up going on here is that what you actually get is Valeria and Dr. Doom and these guys sending out invitations to the most notable intelligent enemies of Reed Richards, the Thinker, the Wizard, and all these guys. That's why I say say, under normal circumstances, none of these guys are anybody to worry about or concern yourself with. But the reality is they are incredibly intelligent in various ways, and all of them have come fairly close to being able to defeat Reed Richards in the Fantastic Four at different points in time, which means these are the guys best suited to basically help destroy the Council of Reeds. Now, the crazy thing about this is even Reed Richards himself doesn't fully understand what's going on here. All these plans are being made without him having the bigger picture in terms of what's supposed to be happening. But in the middle of this meeting, suddenly the Watcher appears. Now, this is back in a time in Marvel Comics when the Watcher showing up actually mattered. Nowadays, man, the Watcher appears and he might as well be holding a bag of Cheetos and getting Cheeto dust all over the damn place. Like, it just doesn't really matter at all. And that's when Reed is like, what have you done, Valeria? Or like, what have you done that would lead to the Watcher appearing with the assembly of all these guys here? And Valeria spills the beans on everything. Now, some of this we know, some of this we don't. What we do know is that Valeria reactivated the portal that Reed Richards had shut down that got him access to the Council of Reeds due to the fact that the portal could be used by the Mad Celestials to enter into the main Marvel Universe. Shutting the portal down meant the Mad Celestials couldn't enter. But we know with Valeria reactivating the portal, when she got in there, the battle was still raging between the Council of Reeds and these Celestials, these godly, powerful Celestials from an alternate reality. That these guys were doing what they could when they could. That Valeria, alongside what was left of the Council of Reeds, tried to flee, and all but 4 of them were totally destroyed. And that those remaining 4 basically ended up traveling through the portal to different places around the world. And the gold that they have here is unknown to us. We don't fully understand what they're doing. We simply just know that they're there, but they're not supposed to be here. And given their nature, where they would basically sacrifice and kill whoever they needed to kill in order to achieve their goal, the concern of Valeria and even Dr. Doom and Reed in learning about all this is that these guys could be a credible threat to the universe. Because remember, Reed Richards himself has a universally relevant intelligence. He's the smartest man in the Marvel Universe. Now, it's more recent years, it's a role that's shifted between Reed, Valeria, Dr. Doom. More recently, as of like the video we made yesterday, Blue Marvel, Adam Brashear. So they're about the 4 smartest people that exist throughout the entirety of the universe. Reed's constructed just crazy capable things. So imagine if there's 4 versions of Reed Richards running around the universe that could wipe out whole armies, that could bring entire empires crashing down, that could destroy the universe in its entirety. That's what we're dealing with here, right? So again, it's a very, very interesting concept, because what we end up doing is picking up several months after all of this, which is to say, after all these guys had passed through this portal, which is about what's going on right now, right? So essentially, Valeria passed through the portal and all that stuff had gone on a few months ago. But the truth about this is that these guys are each traveling to a different location. One of the first places they travel to is out to the peak in Old Atlantis. You guys remember that from a territory, an Atlantean colony that was discovered that nobody knew about. Now, this version of Reed here is actually designed to gain the trust of a portion of the old Atlanteans by revealing a traitor within their midst. And what this version of Reed does is actually tell these guys, I can help you eliminate this threat, right? Eliminate this traitorous threat that exists out there, but I'm gonna need something in return. We don't know exactly what that thing is, but we'll find out fairly soon. The second Reed travels to the Forever City. We talked about that earlier, where it was a city that was previously created by the High Evolutionary that was designed to basically jumpstart the evolution of everybody on Earth, but it ended up going awry. He shut the whole process down and then basically walked away. But the Ascension engine is what this version of Reed is after, because it's an astronomical source of power. And so as a result of that, this version of Reed makes a deal with the Mole Man, whose people have been traveling to the Forever City in order to step into their next stage of evolution. That instead of the Mole Men basically regressing and becoming these exceedingly primitive life forms, they do, but their primitive life forms were actually more advanced life forms, meaning they were more capable and intelligent at one point in time, and much like people on Reddit, they regressed and they became less intelligent as time went on. And so as a result of that, this guy basically makes a deal with Mole Man, but we don't find out exactly what it's for. Now at that point, we shift over to the blue area of the moon with the Universal Inhumans. Now again, kind of re-explaining this a bit here, when it came to the Universal Inhumans, what we learned is that where previously it was believed the Inhumans on Earth were the only Inhumans, that those Inhumans survived because of the Great Purge, which meant the Kree who created the Inhumans annihilated pretty much every Inhuman around the universe they could possibly find, due to the fact that there was a prophecy that the Inhumans would rise up and destroy the Kree Empire. The ones on Earth survived. These Universal Inhumans are others who survived. We simply just didn't know about it at the time. We learned about it here during Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four run. But what goes on here is this third version of Reed shows up here and starts making these these promises about how he can help the Inhumans, he can help them achieve their goals, and so on and so forth. We don't get like the full-on description of these terms. Instead, what ends up happening is one of the leaders of the Inhumans asks one of the members to read the mind of this version of Reed, and that's when they find out he's lying. That basically it's a big ruse here. These different versions of Reed are all working with these different groups, but they're effectively tricking them in order to gain something for themselves. This version of Reed, his plot's discovered, this guy's killed on the spot. Like, that's it. Like, this guy's destroyed. And so the fourth version of Reed Richards goes to what's called the other side of Zero, that nightclub that we talked about, which is still like one of the best names ever for a nightclub. I feel like if you go there, all they're going to be doing is just playing like incredibly hardcore electronic dance music, or I don't know, like stuff from like the John Wick soundtrack. But this version of Reed goes there, he meets with the cult, the leader of the cult of the Negative Zone, which is basically some of Annihilus's forces from the Negative Zone residing on Earth. And that's a big deal because remember, the Annihilation Wave almost destroyed the entirety of the universe. So having people who exist on Earth that can access the Baxter Building of the Fantastic Four and open the portal to the Negative Zone, that would create all kind of problems. That's how Johnny Storm died. And so when this version of Reed meets with this guy, he basically speaks directly to Annihilus and says, I need something from you, but I realize in order to get this, I'm gonna have to give you something. So what do you need from me in order for me to get what I need from you? And the response of Annihilus is, open the portal to the Negative Zone and keep it open. Open for the forces of Annihilus, open for everything. And so what ends up happening is this exact thing takes place. We end up transitioning to what is basically the meeting of all these different versions of Reed. And what we end up finding out is that what they were constructing is probably one of the single most important things that have ever been made in the history of Marvel Comics. This is an object called Saul's Anvil. Now, this is when these different plans and machinations all start to come together. One of the first things that happens is you have what's now called the Council of Dr. Doom, right? The Council of Doom, which is cool. All these villains meeting together to find a way to destroy these alternate reality versions of Reed. And that one of the things that happens is they all start thinking like, we should destroy them doing this, so we should destroy them doing that, or so on and so forth. And a point that's raised here is that none of them are thinking about this the right way. And Reed even stands up and says that. He's like, yes, these men are versions of me and therefore possess an intelligence of a similar, or in some instances, greater magnitude, but they are also not me. They do not have families or friends. They only have each other and their cause. They push worlds around and rebuild suns. This is much, much worse than any of you could have ever imagined, right? Like, you can't defeat them the way you would defeat me. You can't go after a Susan Storm or a Johnny Storm or a Ben Grimm or Franklin and Valeria. You have to learn to think outside the box. You have to learn to think separately. And so what they start to do is they come to this realization, okay, if all these guys have shown up here and they haven't launched attack against anybody yet, then what could they possibly be doing? What would Reed do in this situation? And the conclusion they come to is they're building something. They're building a thing. Now, what they're going to use this thing for is anybody's guess, but they're using it. And what you have is Valeria, who chimes in and says that what they're building is something called Saul's Anvil. It has something to do with a machine buried on the moon, and there's a bit with the Negative Zone and some way to use the Ascension engine in the Forever City, and they need a thermal vent. They plan on using the one under Old Atlantis. So that's why they're meeting around with all these different groups and using all these different guys. That each one of these places, that's why the War of the Four Cities was so important. Each one of these four places holds a key that will allow these four versions of Reed Richards to build this giant construct and to use it for whatever the purpose happens to be. And so what you end up getting at the same time this is happening, you have Susan Storm, who's contacted by Old Atlantis saying, we're under attack. When she gets there, it's the forces of the Mole Men who have been brought by that version of Reed, or one of the versions of Reed, to basically weed out and destroy those in Old Atlantis in order to ensure that another group in Old Atlantis can seize power. It's basically orchestrating a coup d'etat. And so while this battle reigns and this whole thing goes on, Susan Storm comes face to face with an alternate version of Reed Richards. And this guy pulls the trigger on her, like literally just shoots her and destroys her on the spot, or at least incapacitates her. Doesn't really kill her, but like incapacitates her on the spot. The kick at all this comes in when this alternate Reed actually destroys the entire city of Old Atlantis. Now, initially it's seen as a betrayal, but his response is it's necessity, because what he wants is what's under the city. It's a giant thermal vent. He doesn't care about anything else out there, right? The whole scheme was to basically sow conflict and allow him to operate without anybody actually knowing what he was doing. And so with the entire city being completely and totally eradicated, then their sights turn to the Forever City. And so with really nothing else left to do, the Future Foundation heads back to the Baxter building where Reed Richards is met with a pissed off wife. And this is Susan Storm, angry as she's ever been. And the reason why is because Reed kept all this from her. Now, here's the thing. As a husband, you just don't keep stuff like that from your wife, and you really shouldn't keep anything from your wife. If anything, that's the one person you can go to talk about anything. If you're in a marriage and you just can't talk to your wife about stuff, maybe you're married to the wrong person, right? That would be my argument. But the thing about this is that with Reed having this conversation with Susan and finally spilling the beans and telling her what's going on, that is her feeling immensely betrayed, but also being able to focus on the task at hand and saying, okay, then let's focus on the thing that we have to focus on. Let's take care of this thing that we have to take care of. Now, with the Forever City, things are a little more diplomatic. Instead of just blowing the whole place up, right, in order to access what's under it, this version of Reed actually meets with those evolved mole men, and the thing that they've been striving for is to actually be able to procreate themselves. It's the reason why the mole man's moloids have basically been leaving him and traveling to the Forever City, because they kind of have to, right? I mean, well, they want to so they can evolve, but they're also being lured there by those who have evolved. What this would do is it would broker the peace. It would basically mean that the moloids under Mole Man wouldn't be lured away from him anymore. He'd be able to stay a king, because after a while, I mean, if we're being honest with ourselves, who wants to be a mole man if there's no king that comes with it, right? There's no crown that comes with it. You're literally just a weird looking guy who lives underground with a bunch of weird looking dudes. There's no interest in doing that. And so this would allow things to basically have a peaceful resolution. And it does allow for these versions of Reed to quote unquote repair the machine in order to solve the problem. And then in turn, allow this kind of peace to be brokered where the mole man keeps his forces, the evolved people stay there, and that's basically it. But in the midst of all this, suddenly a giant city starts to appear above the Forever City. And where the question starts being asked, okay, like what in the world's going on, right? Like, is that old Atlantis? Like, what's happening here? The response that's given is that's a ship of Kree design. That is a ship that has not been on Earth for quite some time. That is the city of Attilan. The Inhuman royal family has arrived. Now, as most of you guys know, I don't like Black Bolt. This story, or really like Jonathan Hickman's run, is one of the 3 times ever in the history of Marvel Comics when Black Bolt's ever been cool or interesting in any real way. And you guys will find out next week, because we're gonna bring this video to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.